Protests in Iran that were sparked by the country's widening economic crisis have grown to become the largest since the protests back in 2022. And over the past 10 days, they've continued to spread across the Islamic Republic despite efforts by the Iranian regime to quell the unrest. Could the crippled regime be at a tipping point? And are outside forces helping fuel this discontent? Here to discuss this is Gregg Roman, the executive director of the Middle East Forum, a think tank which focuses on protecting American interests and values in the Middle East. He previously served as the political advisor to the deputy foreign minister of Israel and worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. He joins us from Israel. Gregg, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Tony, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's bring everybody up to speed. A lot of distraction over the holidays. What triggered this latest round of protest in Iran, and how significant is it?
I want to call it the perfect storm for Iranian seekers of freedom and democracy, and the most imperfect situation for those who they are protesting against. The Iranian rial, their currency, was able to be devalued at an all-time low on December 26th, day after Christmas. A day later, the Iranian bazaar, which went on strike back in 1979, it was considered largely to be the death knell of the Shah's government. That was the government in place before the Islamic Republic came under Ayatollah Khomeini, went on strike again 49 years later. And you find yourself in a situation where, because of the inability for simple shopkeepers, commercial merchants, truck drivers, even government workers, who are now subsiding on an average salary of $100 a month, they can't even afford basic goods like milk, eggs, bread, and subsidies that the government has given out for oil, gas, electricity. Everything that could go wrong in the country is not working, and it all came to a head with this latest devaluing of the currency and this 50% inflation rate. So if you consider the economic factors, that the regime has been weakened with its ability to clamp down on public protest after Operation Midnight Hammer in the Israeli-Iran war back in June, the individuals who are the most affected by this, the shopkeepers who couldn't even sell their goods, couldn't even afford to buy these goods coming in from imports with overseas markets, decided to go on strike, and now the entire country in 30 out of 31 provinces has erupted into what we see now on day 10 of these protests.
So Gregg, the difference here from 2022, where that was more driven by social unrest than necessarily economic. But the government doesn't have the capacity at present to squash this, and they've been exposed. They no longer have all of their outer lying surrogates that are able to, impress the world, or deceive, I should say, the world that they have some type of tremendous power. It's been exposed. And I think even the people in Iran, even though the media hasn't been reporting it there locally, they see that this is not the same regime that it was 2 years ago.
Not at all. It's not even the same regime it was 6 months ago, prior to the Israeli-Iran war. I mean, the protest that started in September of 2022, which became known as the Women Life Freedom Protest, was over the mandatory wearing of hijab, or the head covering that Iranian Muslim and non-Muslim women were forced to wear according to the aims of the morality police and the laws of the Islamic Republic. But after the June war, there was a general sort of protest movement against the hijab 6 months ago, where a lot of women started walking around Iran's capital, and even in some major cities like Shiraz, Tabriz, Isfahan, which are outside of the capital of Tehran, to no longer wear hijab. And in doing so, the morality police didn't crack down because they knew that their ability to respond en masse to another women life, freedom-like protest, like 3 years ago when millions of Iranians came out because of a social issue, would be weakened. But now we see this perfect storm, as I said before at the beginning of the segment, of economic unrest, people still having feelings about what happened back in 2022, and even going back before that, 2019, and really the Green Movement back in 2009, which would have succeeded had President Obama not said to the public that this was an internal Iranian issue. And to add on top of that, I mean, there's a lot of factors here. President Trump giving support to the Iranian protesters by threatening the Islamic Republic, that if they violently respond to these protests, that the U.S. may step in, not with boots on the ground, but protecting protesters' lives. Airstrikes, cyber warfare, more economic disruption has really given a new wind of support in the sails of the Iranian protest movement. And I think we finally see the Iranian people stepping up and saying, we'll take care of this of ourselves. Just
Right.
make sure that you have our back in case we need you. Not with invasion, but with public support.
Well, and we know after the attack on their nuclear facilities, the elimination of those facilities, Israel has eliminated their ability to defend their skies. And so,
Right.
drone strikes or whatever could easily be taken to eliminate some of those that are prosecuting or persecuting the protesters. So let's talk about, Greg, this perfect storm. They no longer have this axis of resistance. All of their outerlying surrogates have been decimated. The people see it. The regime is basically naked. The people know what the capacity that they have and they don't have. What will it take to tip this over? What's the tipping point?
I think what the Iranian people need to know is that a catalytic event, very much like before the 1979 revolution really started going, would have to take place. Perhaps it's the son of the Ayatollah leaving Tehran. Perhaps it's marching on the Iranian parliament. You might even get to the point where there starts to become fissures in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And we even saw that happen in a protest tonight. You had soldiers who were in sniper positions around a small town outside of Tehran, where the soldiers all of a sudden went down from their sniper perches and joined the protest against the regime. So when your rank and file enforcers who are supposed to be beating and arresting and even in some cases killing protesters start joining the protest, you may see yourself at the tipping point. And I really think that the one thing that the Iranian people are asking for is international support in condemning the leadership of the Islamic Republic. Statements like President Trump made, statements like what Prime Minister Netanyahu made 2 days ago in Israel, perhaps the British Prime Minister, the French President, that the Iranian people know that the international community supports their struggle for freedom against the repression and suppression of the Islamic Republic is what is needed. And the more public outcry that comes from world leaders, I think the more successful you may see the Iranian people stand up for their rights, for freedom, for life, and for really stopping Islamism in their country, which prior to 1979, Iran was a diverse country. And I don't mean diversity in the, equity and inclusion sense, but you had all these religions living peacefully together. And I think that that's the direction that the country wants to move back to have that great Persian pride, but also to embrace the West, very much like it was after the 1906 constitutional monarchy came into place. And there's just one last thought on this. The U.S. can help this civil war, which looks like it's emerging, without having to fire a shot. They can affect electronic infrastructure, make sure that there's an umbrella by not having the Iranian anti-air missile systems work, making sure that they can create strike funds for members of the Iranian rank and file working class to have subsistence without having to rely on the regime. There are many things that the U.S. can do through information operations, through information warfare, through psychological operations, targeting the regime, which will help support the protests without having to have one American soldier on the ground in Iran.
Now, Greg, you laid out the history of Iran, much different than some of the surrounding Middle Eastern countries where we've seen regime change that has gone from bad to worse. What do we need to do, though, to ensure that at this tipping point that we're at, that if in fact it comes and we see a change, that we get a change that is beneficial to the entire Middle East?
So I think we have to look at this as a controlled implosion, a housing demolition, if you will. You know that there's 3,000 years of Persian history, which is on the side of the Iranian people, which I think that they would very much enmesh and embrace. And you even have a transition plan that's been brought forth by other organizations in Washington, D.C., like the National Union for Democracy in Iran, the Iran Prosperity Project, and not going so far as like we did in Iraq or Afghanistan by destroying state institutions. You take off the political leadership, we allow the mid-level bureaucrats to continue doing their job, and you put into place a consultative constitutional assembly that will try to bring freedom and liberty and other items by the Iranian people, decided for the Iranian people without any Western influence insofar as relates to governing state institutions. And I think the second that you lift sanctions on a government that is not the Islamic Republic, everything else will fall into place. Iran can be the antebellum, can be the bellwether experiment of how the West and a Middle East country works together by allowing the country to do its own construction rather than having it being guided by a United States or an Israel or a European government. Just give them the keys, they'll know how to drive the car.
Greg, what would that make the Middle East look like? How would that change today's Middle East?
Well, there's, I think, a good and a bad here. And there's also an ugly that you have to be aware of. Iran's proxy forces defeat between October of 2023, after October 7th, and the June 2025 war has removed the threat, except maybe for the Houthis and Iraqi Shia militias, who are a different case, but the larger threat of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Assad regime. So if you look at Israel as being the first footprint of the West in the Middle East, those immediate threats have been removed. You remove Iran and the Islamic Republic from the chessboard, the Houthis are by themselves, the Iraqis will fall in line and really rely on domestic Iraqi politics. But it creates a vacuum. And this is where the bad comes in. For Pakistan, for Turkey, for Qatar, to replace Shia Islamism with Sunni Islamism. The idea that you get jihadi forces of the Muslim Brotherhood and even, dare I say, Al-Qaeda derivative force that may fill that vacuum. And the ugly side of it is that Middle East Christians, Middle East minority groups, Jews in Israel will be the ones that have to fight those battles now. The removal of Iran does not mean that the Middle East is a less dangerous place. It means that the U.S. and the West has to take a forced posture, not by putting troops on the ground, but by realigning the way in which it thinks about the region to clearly say that Shia extremism and Sunni extremism will not be tolerated, that Turkey will be treated the same way that Iran is treated, and that we have to rely on U.S. allies like Israel, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, even to a certain extent some of the other Gulf countries, not including Qatar, maybe Egypt to a certain extent, to fill the gap. If that doesn't happen, then I'm afraid that more pernicious forces with a lot more resources that are sort of frenemies of the United States will take Iran's place.
Greg, we just have about a minute left, but as I look at this, this is historic in terms of the geopolitical shifting that's taking place. I mean, you have to go back centuries to see the significance, all triggered by Hamas's attack on Israel and Israel's response to protect themselves and go it alone for the initial part of their war, this multi-front war. And now we see the remaking of the Middle East.
100%. And I think in great moments in history, it's one kinetic event. It's one Archduke Ferdinand-like assassination or one-day battle, or even on a larger sense, the fall of the Ottoman Empire with the Battle of the Battle of Vienna, that it really takes history to change itself. But if there's one thing that I think that your audience should take away from this, is that Israel and the United States are now in a position to allow the U.S. to have a gradual withdrawal of its forces from the region and to give Israel, I won't say the hegemony, but the responsibility for creating sort of a Pax Israeliana, to allow Israel to take the step of guardians of Middle East Christians, guardians of Middle East minorities, guardians of the Abrahamic alliance that includes 4 Arab countries, but now to extend that to sort of have the role of guarding the covenant between Abrahamic faiths. And I think Israel's ready for that position.
We're going to have to cut it off there, but that's got to be clearly articulated and not just assumed. Gregg Roman, 100%. Always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Great insight.